Welcome to Intuitive Defense. My name is Baker. In this video, I'll be talking about a current event that demonstrates how the idea of gun laws or proposed gun laws are not about safety as some politicians, groups, and people say they are. The popular term now, as it pertains to anti-Second Amendment laws, is common sense gun laws. But not that long ago, these same people called it gun control laws, which is exactly what it is. Gun control through law. The source information used for this video is in the articles section of our Intuitive Defense website. We've provided a link to that article in the description of this video, so please feel free to use those references for yourself. The topic for this current event video is not necessarily a new topic or event, as this proposed legislation is a redo of previously proposed legislation, but that does not make it any less important to talk about, especially since this shitty remix is currently playing right now. As we have discussed in previous current event episodes, there are a plethora of willfully ignorant, do-nothing politicians masquerading as intelligent problem solvers whose bright ideas are going to make everyone safer, and it won't cost you a thing, except for some of your freedoms and rights, along with some money, and maybe a few other things, but other than that, won't cost you a thing. The lead rocket surgeon with the bright idea for this video is Congressman David Bayer, Democrat out of Virginia. In August of this year, 2023, he put forth H.R. 5135, which is a piece of legislation that would impose a 1,000% excise tax on the sale of large-capacity ammunition devices, also known as magazines, and semi-automatic assault weapons, which would most likely include rifles and pistols that fall into the definition of assault weapon. At the time of recording this video, August 12, 2023, the text for H.R. 5135 was not available. If history is any indication of the bill text, I would assume this bill will mirror or closely resemble H.R. 8051 from the 117th Congress. That bill, which was named Assault Weapon Excise Act, was introduced in June of 2022 by none other than Congressman David Bayer. The intention of H.R. 8051 was to impose a 1,000% excise tax on Second Amendment protected items, just like H.R. 5135 does. Although the text for H.R. 5135 is not available, the objective is the same as H.R. 8051, so I will use that as a gauge to what H.R. 5135 will most likely include. Excuse me for a second while I add yet again another small splash of whiskey into my coffee. You know, since we're talking about infringement of rights and freedoms by, of course, the government, and since we're getting into the maybe just another teaspoon, since we're getting into the meat and potatoes of this infringement, I don't think that maybe right there. That was probably the teaspoon that I needed. Perfect. Whew. That freedom's a little strong, but that's how freedom should be, strong. Anyway, H.R. 8051 sought to impose a 1,000% excise tax on high-capacity magazines, which include most detachable magazines that have the capacity to hold 10 or more cartridges. To learn more about the deception behind high-capacity magazines, I would recommend watching our current event episode 5 video, which is linked in the description of this video, or you could click on the little shazas that's popping up somewhere up here, maybe down, no, not down here, so it's definitely going to be somewhere up here. Just click on that and after this video, of course, and then you can watch that one. H.R. 8051 also imposed a 1,000% excise tax on assault weapons, pistols and rifles, that are vaguely defined using arbitrary features and or attachments. Remember, the politicians that create this legislation are not subject matter experts, and the majority of the time, those same people are not intelligent individuals.
I've held an AR-15 in my hand. I wish I had it. It is as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving.
If they have to pay out $159 billion less.
You put those two factors together, and you are sure to get an ignorant piece of legislation. If you want to read the text for H.R. 8051 to see the definitions of assault weapons, that link is available on our website, which you can navigate to using the link in the description of this video. Think about this for a second. What if the government wanted to charge you a 1,000% tax for subscribing to YouTube channels? Thankfully, they haven't done that yet, so be sure to quickly click on that little button that says subscribe. Not only is it free, but it helps us out, and it helps you out, because you probably haven't pushed any buttons today. And damn it, pushing buttons is fun. Before going further, let me just clarify that imposing an excise tax is not a new idea. This has been done for many years on many products and already been paid by many people who purchase certain items. One of the areas where an excise tax is applied is to harmful things or services, such as gambling, alcohol, and tobacco. This is commonly referred to as a sin tax. One of the reasons behind an excise tax, or a sin tax, or a fun tax, is to compensate the government for the high social costs these harmful things or services might impose. The theory is, if it costs more, then people are less likely to do it or do more of it because of the financial burden they absorb, assuming they consume, use, or participate with that thing or service legally. Another example of excise tax are fuel and some retirement investment accounts. So again, this is not a new concept, and unfortunately, there are already excise tax applied to items protected by the Second Amendment. 1919 brought about the first excise tax on firearms and ammunition as part of the tax increase associated with World War I. Of course, even after the war ended, some of those taxes remained. Since then, excise taxes have been removed and reimposed on firearms and ammunition. The current excise tax on firearms and ammunition is 10%, which in my opinion is 10% too much. Definitely more than 6 tablespoons of freedom in there. H.R. 8051 and H.R. 5135 is legislation that 100, or should I say 1,000% targets law-abiding citizens, which tells me, the politicians who drafted and proposed this legislation, 1,000% think that law-abiding citizens who choose to exercise their Second Amendment right are viewed as a larger problem than the lawless criminals committing violent crimes using a firearm. If they didn't think that, they would not be pushing legislation that will only apply to law-abiding citizens who legally purchase a firearm. Last time I checked, when criminals buy an illegal firearm, they don't pay taxes on it. I don't know. I could be wrong, but as far as I understand it, that's the case. Furthermore, if passed, this legislation will not magically start making criminals pay taxes on illegally purchased firearms, assuming, of course, that they aren't already paying taxes on their illegally purchased firearms, because the criminals always want to make sure they follow the law. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that they probably pay the taxes. Therefore, this does not apply to or target lawless criminals, and because of this, it will not act as a deterrent to those same lawless criminals. It will, however, act as a deterrent to law-abiding citizens who want to purchase a firearm but can't afford the 1,000% tax. Not only should these politicians be voted out of office, but they should be held criminally and civilly liable for their actions. With this proposal, they have penned their name to a document that shows specific intent without due process or justification of action to intentionally coerce or influence law-abiding citizens from being able to exercise their Second Amendment right using unjust and unreasonable taxation. This is the gray area that the politicians deceptively play in. These politicians aren't outright depriving law-abiding citizens of their Second Amendment rights, as they are not specifically banning the purchase of a firearm or Second Amendment protected items. They are, however, targeting an individual's financial ability to purchase a firearm or Second Amendment protected item. A law-abiding citizen can still purchase a Second Amendment protected item as long as they can afford it. Another way to say this is, a law-abiding citizen can still exercise their Second Amendment right, assuming they have the money to afford the protection of this right. What they are essentially doing is penalizing law-abiding citizens for using or wanting to use a right. This penalty would be issued without a law-abiding citizen breaking any laws or demonstrating a reasonable fear or concern that any laws might be broken by them. Instead, the law-abiding citizen is forced to pay an unreasonable amount of money, tax, simply to use a right they already have. The politicians pushing this legislation say this is a necessary step to reduce gun violence. But again, how will charging law-abiding citizens a 1,000% tax discourage lawless criminals from using a firearm during the commission of a crime? If in fact their objective was to truly reduce gun violence, they would put forth legislation that would only target lawless criminals. Since this legislation specifically targets law-abiding citizens, it is clear that the objective here is to impose a great financial burden through the form of taxation, which is also a punishment, upon law-abiding citizens that will strongly discourage, and in most cases, prevent a law-abiding citizen from exercising their Second Amendment right. Now, if you are anti-Second Amendment, you probably support this type of legislation. Remember though, the grass is always greener because they used more shit. Don't think for a second these same politicians will not come for a right that you support and a right that you use, or any of your other important rights. For instance, what if politicians propose a 1,000% tax on the protection the Fourth Amendment provides, which is unreasonable search and seizure by the government? This would be very difficult to do, but if it was for your safety or the safety of others, they could possibly persuade people to go along with it. For instance, if they said, criminals use defense attorneys to beat criminal charges, that is dangerous and detrimental to the well-being of society. So by imposing a 1,000% excise tax on legal counsel, most criminals won't be able to afford it and will stay in jail forever and ever, or until soft on crime district attorneys or judges let them out. Most people would probably think to themselves, well, yeah, that makes sense. Law-abiding citizens don't need defense attorneys. I support this, and I gladly surrender my right for the illusion of safety. Then, when the government undoubtedly abuses their power and starts searching and seizing everyone and everything, you're screwed. Once you offer up your freedoms and rights on a platter to the government, you don't get them back. Please, sir, take another. Anyway, a tax like this wouldn't necessarily deprive you of your right, but if they impose a 1,000% tax on any and all legal counsel, there's a very high probability you would live with the repercussions of an unreasonable search and or seizure by the government, because representation from a $5,000 defense attorney would now be $50,000. What if the government charges you a 1,000% tax anytime you use your First Amendment right? People say mean things all the time using their First Amendment right. Given the right opportunity and social sentiment, they could justify limitation to this right because of a high social cost these harmful words might impose. Words hurt. Oh. Given the right opportunity and social sentiment, the government could possibly justify a limitation to this right because of a high social cost these harmful words might impose. A reasonable person can assume if the government can tax an individual to use one right, like the Second Amendment, they can also tax them to use all rights. When a right requires permission to use or a tax paid in order for use, that right is no longer a right. It is a privilege, and a privilege can be revoked at any point for any reason by the issuer. Don't say, that'll never happen, because that statement is only true until it does happen. History is filled with frightful moments that people never thought would happen. On top of the issues I have already mentioned, think about another aspect this proposed legislation brings about. If a 1,000% tax turns a $600 pistol before purchase into a $6,000 pistol after purchase, how many people do you think can realistically afford that? Not that many. In the current environment, a lot of people already struggle to purchase a $600 pistol. People depend on firearms to provide effective means of self-defense. The people who live in high crime areas might need that protection more than those who live in low crime areas, or those people who live behind tall walls or have security details. Typically, people who live in high crime areas also fall into the low income category. If you fall into the low income category, you probably can't afford to pay a 1,000% tax on a firearm you desperately depend on to protect you and your family from violent criminals in your high crime area. I know Congressman David Bayer says that his proposal will make everyone the most safetiest anyone has ever been in all of world history forever and ever, but it actually sounds like it creates unsafe environments and situations for low-income individuals living in high-crime areas. To be fair, it will make criminals safer because law-abiding citizens won't be able to afford to legally purchase a firearm to defend themselves against said criminals. So, there's that. If this legislation is passed, at that point, the Second Amendment will no longer be a right that everyone has access to, including low-income individuals. It will then become a privilege that only a few have access to. Whew. That's some scary stuff. Just imagine if the government treated all rights the same. You'd be living in an unsafe third world shithole. But hey, I'm sure that'll never happen. Those are my observations and opinions. Although this video is specifically related to the Second Amendment, that does not mean the issue here is only limited to the Second Amendment, obviously. If they are willing to deprive people of certain freedoms and rights using lies, they are willing to do it to all freedoms and rights. The government doesn't just want a little bit of power, they want it all. Think of the government as a gold digger. They want your money, they want your time, they want your freedom, they want your possessions, and they want your rights. What do you get in return? Even higher taxes, even higher costs of goods, limitations and restrictions on freedoms and rights through unconstitutional laws. And, if they have time, they might turn a pothole into a speed bump because they can't properly fix the roads. It is the job of government to protect our rights, not limit them. Elected leaders act as though the Second Amendment is meant to limit what the people can and cannot do, or what they can and cannot own. But in fact, the only limitation stated within the Second Amendment applies to government, shall not be infringed. Rational people understand this. Emotional people disregard this, and Congressman David Bayer is acting on emotions, or just complete disdain for your Second Amendment right. Either way, it's a problem. What do you think? Is this piece of legislation reasonable? Who do you think this legislation will impact the most? Law-abiding citizens or lawless criminals? Do you think this legislation could set a dangerous precedent that could negatively impact other rights in the future? Let us know in the comment section of this video what your thoughts and opinions are. Lastly, we're working on building the Intuitive Defense channel and have lots of ideas for upcoming videos, along with continued videos for our noob series. So please watch all of our other videos, along with like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel for future content. Some of our videos might be more entertaining than watching a turtle do cartwheels. Actually, now that I think about it, that sounds really entertaining. I don't think we'll be able to top that. So, they'll be okay videos. To David Bayer, you're nothing more than a freedom-depriving redcoat.